It's always fun to go back to Pellan Lake. It's my small town romance in the same world as Archer's Voice, which is probably my, most well-known book and definitely most sold story. And so, it's I always feel like it's sort of like it feels like a warm hug every time I step back into that world. And it's always nice too, when I've been dealing with the world collapsing and people on murder sprees, to kind of like step back into the comfort of a small town where everyone knows each other and bakes blueberry pies and all of that. So it was nice to visit Pellan Lake again for. So when I first wrote Archer's Voice, the it was a time in romance when the billionaire and the playboy and these 27-year-old CEOs of companies, that was like the big draw at the time, or that's what was really popular in romance books. And I kind of just like I had read like two or three books that felt really similar to me, and I was kind of craving something a little bit different. And so I came up with this character who has a disability and just, was a type of hero that was a little bit more vulnerable. And I wanted to toss him into the ring of alpha males out there. And I never expected, for that character to be as embraced as he has been. But you know, he's just really become, one of my, if not my most beloved, male character. And so, um, I took many years to write sort of a spin-off about another character, but I've been being asked for so long to hear other stories from the same place. And so when one came to me, I couldn't resist sitting down and doing it with the broken places. So I came up with the premise. I had listened to an interview with somebody who had had an experience with hallucinogenic drugs as part of a therapy session. I think that this was a veteran who suffered from PTSD. And this was like a self-sought therapy. I think that from what I remember, he had gone like to another country, and where this is legal and something that is offered. And he was talking about this wild experience, and I got this idea in my head, and about the same type of therapy being offered here, but obviously, it's not legal in our country to use many of these substances in a therapeutic setting. So this would have to be something that was sort of underground. And how something that was meant for good in this way that I described could be then turned very evil. And so I kind of went a little further and told my husband and my son at the time. I kind of described this idea that I had and went into a little more detail. And they were both like, yeah, that's a really weird idea. It would all be in the execution. Like it's a weird idea, but it's a good idea, and it could either fall really flat or be done really well. And I'll leave it up to the reader to decide like which way or how I achieved that or did not. But anyway, that's where the idea came from. And I think, since I've actually heard of this idea of using hallucinogenic drugs in therapy for specifically trauma in several other places. So I don't know. I feel like it's something that is maybe timely and that might be talked about or discussed more and more, in the future. So that is where that idea came from. It does get a little bit more complicated, in telling a love story in the midst of murder and mayhem, because obviously, murder and mayhem is rarely sexy, right? So having somebody notice another person in a sexual way um, in the midst of a crime setting can be tricky. So I definitely tend to make the romance secondary to the crime. But I have a friend who she was mentioning her grandmother one time, how her grandmother um, used to say, I can't even remember the quote exactly, but it was about attraction and admiration. And it was just about, the percentages that she believed that you should, have toward your significant other. And so I think that, a lot of love stories tend to focus really on the attraction, which obviously is important, without really adding the admiration. And so I really do try in every story to show the reader why these two people admire the other one, and that's really important. It's not just because they think they're good looking and have a, hot body or whatever. It's that they have found a reason to greatly admire this other person. And I think that goes a long way toward the reader, like rooting for them to be together. With Heart of the Sun, I can't take credit for the idea because it actually is an outline that a company called Temple Hill Productions came up with. And they brought it to my agent and asked if, she had any authors who might be interested in writing from this outline. And I read it, and it was so interesting, and I felt like fated because I had, again, I'm telling you how many podcasts and interviews I listen to constantly, but I had listened to an interview about someone talking about the threat of an EMP. And you might have heard of this. It's been in the news somewhat recently, and there's several types of EMPs. There's, a solar flare like in Heart of the Sun. And there's also EMPs which could be caused by nuclear weapons being set off very high in the atmosphere. And they don't kill anybody with the explosion, but they shut down the grid basically, which results in mass deaths eventually. So anyway, I had kind of like done a little bit of research on this just out of pure like fascination and like, wait a minute, is anybody actually like doing something about this? This sounds like a very, big issue. And so then I was presented this outline and it just felt like, whoa. So I was, obviously really, really interested in writing it. And so I took it on, and so they had come up with, the major points of the outline, but I had to create the characters and the specific happenings and do most of the research too, which again, I was already very interested in, especially in with a story like this, because, it's literally very atmospheric, like you probably saw the results of the recent solar flares that happened with the what is it, borealis, it's escaping me now, with the all the beautiful colors in the sky. And something like that would be happening, just that would be what the sky looked like for weeks at a time, or certainly during the time span of this story. So I definitely did visualize it very strongly. But also the different with Heart of the Sun, the unique thing about this story is that a lot of apocalyptic stories kind of come in after the big thing has happened, whether it's a virus or a war or something like that. And this one, it starts out where the event happens, and it's like within the first days and weeks of, nobody knows what's happening. And you start to see society crumble in very real time, and people realizing that, oh, this isn't just like, let's use all the meat up in our freezer tonight and have a fun barbecue, because the lights are out temporarily. This is like people starting to realize that they're in deep, deep trouble. So all kinds of fun things to explore there.